Do you want your child to stay away from drugs like vapes and marijuana? The answer isn't just saying, don't do it, it's having clear, honest conversations. Today, we're talking about taking a clear stand against vapes and marijuana because your words matter. Parents and caregivers are the first line of defense. Hi, I'm Aaron, and welcome back to Talk Before They Try, brought to you by the Kent County Health Department. This is episode 6, and if you haven't seen our first 5 episodes, pause here and check them out. We've covered a variety of important topics to assist you in teaching your child skills to help them resist drug use, all while strengthening your relationship. Today we're focusing on how you can take a clear stand against vapes and marijuana. Stick around for an interview with Dr. Shelley Schmidt, a pulmonologist and critical care doctor with Corewell Health. She'll share insights on what these drugs do to young people's health. Here's a good quote about what we're talking about today. Your actions and words are the most powerful influence on your child's decision. We don't know who said that, but they're probably a pretty smart person. Let's take a moment to think back to when you were 12 or 13. Did a friend ever pressure you to try something risky, like smoking or sneaking out? How did you feel? Nervous? Curious? Scared? What helped you say no or wish you had? Those moments shaped you, and right now your words can help your child say no to drugs. Why does taking a clear stand matter? Children learn by hearing firm messages. When parents set clear rules and talk about risks, children are less likely to try drugs that harm their brain and lungs. Here's a bit about the drugs we're going to be talking about today. Vapes, also known as electronic cigarettes. They contain nicotine, which is addictive and can impair memory. The name vape is a little misleading because they don't contain any water vapor. They do contain a whole bunch of other chemicals that can cause long-term damage when inhaled repeatedly. They come in potentially thousands of flavor combinations that can be really enticing to young people. Marijuana. This plant, also called cannabis, contains a psychoactive chemical ingredient called THC. That's what causes the euphoric high that people get from marijuana. Today, people aren't just smoking it, they're consuming it as edibles, like candy, or cookies, or brownies, vaping THC in electronic cigarettes, or using highly concentrated extracts like oils, and even drinking marijuana-infused beverages. Marijuana and marijuana products can affect learning, attention, and mental health. What's your role? Clear talks show that you care about their health. It's important that your child understands how you feel about these drugs and why. Vapes and marijuana are everywhere. Vapes seem cool with candy flavors, and marijuana feels safe because it's legal in Michigan for people over the age of 21. But these drugs hurt growing brains and bodies. The good news, your voice is your child's biggest influence. Here are 3 ways that you can take a clear stand. First, state your expectations. Say, our family doesn't use vapes or marijuana because they're harmful. Be firm. Second, discuss risks openly. Share facts like vaping can damage your lungs. Invite questions without lecturing. Third, practice refusal skills. Role play saying things like, no, nah, I don't vape, it's not my thing. Try this at home. Have a 5-minute talk about vapes or marijuana. Start with a fact like vapes have as much nicotine as cigarettes. Ask, what do you think? Then share your stance. We don't use these because your health matters. Here's another conversation starter. I've heard some young people try vapes or marijuana. What do you see at school? Let's talk about staying away from those. We've got a question from a parent about these drugs. I'm worried my child's curious about vapes or marijuana, but I don't want to sound accusing. How do I start the conversation? Great question. Start with curiosity by saying something like, I've seen news about young people vaping. What's it like at school? Share a fact and your stance, such as, vapes hurt your brain, so we don't use them. Keep it calm and listen. Now, let's hear from an expert on this topic. I'm joined by Dr. Shelley Schmidt, a pulmonologist and critical care doctor with Corewell Health. She sees the impact these drugs have on young people in her everyday work. Shelley, what are the biggest health risks of vaping and marijuana for young people?
First and foremost is addiction. 90% of people who smoke on a daily basis began smoking when they were less than 18 during brain development. As we grow and as we perform activities over and over, the brain hardwires that activity in order to make us faster and more efficient at it. But the brain can't tell the difference between learning a musical instrument or throwing a football or a nicotine addiction. Repeated exposure to nicotine during brain development literally hardwires the addiction pathway into the brain, creating a lifelong addiction. No amount of nicotine is safe. That's our US Surgeon General and their report on youth and e cigarette use. Nicotine impairs attention, memory, and judgment. It leads to risk taking behaviors, which can ultimately lead to more interactions with the legal system. Teens who are addicted to nicotine accomplish less in terms of schooling, sports, activities, and life. Nicotine is also a gateway drug, which leads to more lethal drugs further down the road. And the addiction is what sets up these years of repeated use, which then create the long term health impacts that we see of using these chemicals, inhaling these chemicals. And that can include lung damage and inflammation, heart disease, as well as cancer. Addiction is the key to all of these downstream effects. No matter what you think about nicotine or marijuana, no addictive substances are safe for the developing brain.
How can parents spot signs their child might be using these drugs?
The classic signs that we talk about when it comes to using addictive substances are things like losing motivation in their activities, doing worse in school, a change of friends. But what makes nicotine so interesting is that it affects everyone. We see people who are high achievers academically. We see athletes, we see music and band kids, as well as the kids who don't like going to school, all susceptible to nicotine and nicotine addiction. And the reason is that nicotine acts in a part of our brain that we actually share with lower mammals that helps us differentiate safety from threat. And so when nicotine enters the body and it binds to this portion of the brain, it signals instinctual safety. Nicotine is an incredible anxiety drug, and this is why people use it. The problem is that the longer it's been since the last nicotine exposure, then this part of the brain begins to signal instinctual threat. And then this shows itself as agitation or anger or anxiety. And so, if you have a young person who comes home from school and they are frustrated or agitated and they head in their room or head in the bathroom, and 3 to 5 minutes later, they come out cool as a cucumber asking what's for dinner, something happened in there. And that would make me want to head back into that room, wait for them to follow and say, tell me what's going on. These vapes often smell almost a fruity or a sweet chemical like smell. There are a lot of different flavors, and so there can be a lot of different scents. Sometimes they can smell like a scented candle or like a body wash. If there is a product that you haven't purchased that you're smelling in the home, that would make me want to investigate a little bit as well. If you find a vape in the home, we have to presume that it's your child's vape. They're certainly going to say it's probably not or that it's a friend. But the goal here is no longer to, try to interrogate or figure that out. The goal is to get them help. And the way that we get them help is with open ended questions, a caring heart, showing them that you want to help them through this process. For me, I have teenagers at home. So when my teenagers come home, I'm all for independence, but we have an interaction every single time they come home. I hug them, I look them in the eye. That gives me a lot of information. If there's something that's a little bit off, then that sort of starts the discussion. Or it may be, we'll see you tomorrow. And then the next day, when things are settled down, we had the discussion. Last night, I was a little concerned that I smelled this, or I was a little concerned that I found this in the car. and hopefully allow for more discussion. And whether or not your kid vapes isn't about being a good or bad parent, right? This is an industry that's knows what it's doing, and it's really about just trying to protect our kids and help our kids. We want to get them off these substances, get them back to where they're able to make the choices they want to make in their life and not make the choices that big tobacco wants them to make in their life.
How do you address misconceptions like vapes being safer?
Not in their developing brain. And for them to understand that this is a lifetime of addiction that I'm setting up here. But nicotine also causes seizure disorders. It causes funny heart rhythms, including sudden cardiac death. So our National Poison Control Centers take about 700 calls a month for nicotine poisonings, including deaths related to those nicotine poisonings. The vapes now are 2 cartons of cigarettes worth of nicotine in one handheld device. So, I mean, hundreds of cigarettes worth of nicotine in one handheld device. And so sometimes it's understanding like the scale and the scope of what we're dealing with here. But there's also all of the chemicals. So vapes are just aerosolized chemicals. And one of those chemicals, propylene glycol, is what's needed in order to dilute the nicotine to make the aerosol. When propylene glycol is heated, it becomes formaldehyde, which we know is a cancer causing chemical. Marijuana or THC, that active ingredient, actually has to be dissolved in an oil based fluid in order to aerosolize it. So you're effectively spraying oils all throughout the lung. And so, while coconut oil or olive oil might be considered natural, it's not natural in the lung. The lung is only designed for clean air. All of these other chemicals that come into the lung are going to cause inflammation. The question is just how much and how severe. Prolonged use leads to chest pain, shortness of breath, can lead to lung conditions like asthma or emphysema, even, which is disintegration of the lung tissue, which we see with typical combustible smokers. But it also leads to heart disease and blood vessel disease, as well as cancers. So these chemicals are all known. There's been an extensive amount of basic science research that has produced a mountain of evidence that these devices and the chemicals within them are harmful. This is a CT scan of a 24-year-old with a vaping induced lung injury who was on a ventilator for several days in our intensive care unit. I'm going to direct your attention to the top parts of the lung, the dark gray portion, which is full of air. But what we can see are black holes within that dark gray section. That is emphysema. That is disintegration of the lung tissue. That lung tissue will never grow back. Typically, we would expect someone to be smoking a pack a day for 10 years before we would even start to see emphysema in the lung. And this patient had been vaping for less than 4. But what if we don't have an acute injury that's that severe? What about chronic use? So, this is a picture of a functional MRI. And in a functional MRI, that blue color means good airflow in and out of the lung in those locations. So, on the bottom row, you can see it's all blue, which means there's great airflow through the lung. That's a normal, healthy person. The top row is someone who's a 1 month out from a vaping induced lung injury, like our patient. And you can see little patches of black in there, which are areas that are still inflamed and do not have good airflow. But the center row is actually someone with chronic use. This is someone without symptoms. And what you can see is that the tops of the lungs are getting a black sort of rind and some little black patches within them. This is the exact location we would expect to see emphysema on a scan. This is a classic lung disease associated with smokers and represents just complete disintegration of the lung tissue.
What's a practical tip for parents to prevent their child from trying these?
Talking to your kids early is really paramount. And part of that's because the first person who talks to your kids about a subject becomes the source of truth. So if you're the first person to talk to your kids about nicotine, you're the source of truth on the topic. If Billy up the street is the first person who talks to your kids about nicotine, Billy up the street's the source of truth. And now you're competing with a different narrative. And so You're walking into the mall and somebody is vaping. If you're sitting at a stoplight and there's like a puff of vape cloud in the car in front of you, those are prime times to ask, do you know what that is that you're seeing there? Or what do you think about that? Or have you seen that? If they're in middle school or higher, they're going to know exactly what it is. And we're seeing these devices even in the elementary schools. And so we can't really start soon enough warning them that they're dangerous and that they can change their brain and set things up for a lifelong addiction. And so we're very clear about the abstinence piece because it's really not safe. Any of these drugs, whether it be THC, again, nicotine, marijuana, any alcohol, any addictive substance. If your kids are older, the horse is a bit out of the barn, so they're gonna know what's going on, but they're not gonna understand, most likely, how the vape is working and why their friends or they are addicted to them. Educating them about how nicotine works on the body and why they're using it for anxiety control or their friends are using it can help them to understand what's happening here, but then also open up the conversation for treatment and that the importance of stopping as soon as we can so that again the brain gets to hardwire in the choices that they want to make and not hardwire in the choices big tobacco wants to make. Getting them to treatment, getting them to an understanding into treatment is critically important. Another component to reducing substance use is managing anxiety. These devices are used for anxiety, whether it's nicotine or THC. That's what they're using them for. And so, modeling other ways of managing anxiety is critically important. And whether that's through exercise, activity, interests, whether it's reading, mindfulness, religious practices, therapy, counseling, there are myriad other ways in order for us to manage anxiety and showing our kids how to do that because life is anxiety provoking. It will always be. But how we manage that, and if we can manage that without substance, then that can lead to a healthier, more productive life.
Thanks, Dr. Schmidt. Those tips will help us protect our children from these drugs. In our next episode, we'll explore teaching decision making skills to avoid risky choices. If you're finding value in Talk Before They Try, join us for the rest of the series. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment about how you've talked to your child about drugs. What worked? Please do us a favor, answer our short survey to help us improve our future videos. The link is found in the description. Thanks for joining us for Talk Before They Try, and remember, parents are the first line of defense.